All right, let's talk about a book that's over 400 years old, but, and you might not believe this, feels like it could have been written today. We're talking about a story that pulled off some of the wildest, most mind-bending tricks in storytelling way before anyone else even thought of them. Today, we're diving into the incredible world of Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote.
Okay, so to really get what makes this book a masterpiece, just try to wrap your head around this idea from the literary critic Harold Bloom. Imagine you're a character in a story, right? And one day you stumble upon a book, and it's about you, your life, your adventures. And you start reading it and think, wait a minute, that's not how it happened. You start critiquing your own plot. It's an absolutely wild concept, and it just completely shatters that wall between the story and the person reading it.
So, that leads to the big question, doesn't it? How on earth did a writer back in the early 1600s come up with a storytelling device that feels so ahead of its time, something we literally see in movies today? Seriously, this isn't just some dusty old classic. No. This is the blueprint, the revolutionary first draft for the modern novel.
All right, so how did this whole thing kick off? Well, it all started with a guy who, let's just say, took his reading list a little too seriously. Our hero is this country nobleman named Alonso Quijano, and he has one massive obsession. He is completely, utterly hooked on books about knights and chivalry.
He just devours these stories, brave knights, damsels in distress, you name it, and he reads so many that his grip on reality doesn't just fray, it completely snaps. As Cervantes himself puts it, his mind was completely gone, and in that moment he decides the world desperately needs a knight-errant, and he's just the man for the job. So, boom. He renames himself Don Quixote of La Mancha, dusts off some rusty old armor, and rides out to bring fiction to life.
And this, right here, this is a perfect little story that shows you exactly how his mind is working. He needs a helmet, okay? So he makes one out of cardboard. To see if it's strong enough, he gives it a whack with his sword and poof, it shatters instantly. Right. So he makes a second one. This time he's a little smarter. He reinforces it with iron strips. But here's the kicker, and this is the most important part. He decides not to test it this time. He just looks at it and declares it a perfect, battle-ready helmet. You see what he's doing. He is actively choosing his preferred fiction over the reality that's staring him right in the face.
And that one choice, that's the engine for the entire book. It's all about this constant, sometimes hilarious, and often kind of painful collision between Don Quixote's imaginary world and the gritty reality of 17th century Spain, a time when, let's be honest, knights were definitely not a thing anymore.
And man, this just shows you how huge that gap between his perception and the real world truly is. When Don Quixote rolls up to some rundown little inn, what does he see? A majestic castle. The working girls there? Nope. To him, they're noble ladies. And of course, the most famous one of all, he sees a field of ordinary windmills, and his brain transforms them into an army of terrifying giants that he, as a valiant knight, is duty-bound to conquer.
What's incredible is that even with all the evidence, he's covered in bruises from his battles, and everyone he meets is just totally confused by him, he never ever wavers. He talks as if his epic legend is already being written. He sees himself as the hero of this grand story, already imagining his deeds immortalized for future generations. He isn't just living a fantasy, he's narrating it as he goes.
Okay, but this is where things get really wild. This is where Cervantes takes this incredible leap into what we now call a meta-narrative. The story stops being just about a man who read too many books and becomes about the very nature of stories and reality itself.
So, pretty early on, Don Quixote meets this prisoner, a guy named Ginés de Pasamonte, who happens to be writing his autobiography. He even gives a little sales pitch for it, claiming his true life story is way more entertaining than any fiction. Why? Because it deals with truths so appealing that no lies can equal them. And right there, Cervantes is already planting this seed, the idea that we are all, in a way, the authors of our own stories.
But you know what? That was just the warm-up. In the second part of the novel, published 10 years after the first, Cervantes does something that nobody, and I mean nobody, had ever done before. So get this. The first book, Part 1 of The Adventures of Don Quixote, has become a massive bestseller inside the novel itself. Characters in Part 2 now walk up to Don Quixote and tell him they've read his book. They even give him feedback, like suggesting maybe the author should have left out some of the more embarrassing beatings he took.
Just stop and think about that for a second. Don Quixote and his squire Sancho Panza are now celebrities, famous because of a book written about them that they are currently living inside of. They actually argue with other characters about plot points, about their characterization, about what really happened. They are fully aware that they are literary figures. It's completely mind-blowing.
So why is this 400-year-old literary game so important? Why does it matter today? Well, because with this move, Cervantes basically invented the modern novel as we know it.
See, before Don Quixote, stories were generally pretty straightforward. Cervantes just blew that wide open. He created self-aware characters, he blurred the line between the reader and the story, and he forced us all to question what's real. I mean, think of movies like The Truman Show, or characters like Deadpool who talk directly to the audience. All of that stuff has its roots right here. These weren't just clever tricks, they were foundational ideas that would shape storytelling for the next 4 centuries.
He was breaking the fourth wall centuries before the term even existed. And that's why Don Quixote isn't just a book about a knight's wacky adventures. It's a book about the power of books. It's about how fiction shapes our reality, how we become the heroes of our own narratives, and how the very act of telling a story is just as powerful as the story itself.
And this leaves us with one last thought. Don Quixote built his reality from the stories he consumed. He chose his narrative and he lived by it, no matter the cost. So 400 years later, the question is our own world any less shaped by the stories we tell ourselves? Thanks for joining us.